Abraham Lincoln, Civil War Leadership and Ending Slavery. Abraham Lincoln stands as one of America's most revered presidents, whose leadership during the nation's darkest hour preserved the Union and fundamentally transformed American society by abolishing slavery. His journey from a humble log cabin in Kentucky to the White House remains one of the most remarkable stories in American history, and his legacy continues to shape the United States today. Early life and path to politics. Born on February 12, 1809, in Hodgenville, Kentucky, Abraham Lincoln grew up in poverty on the American frontier. His family moved to Indiana when he was 7, and later to Illinois. Lincoln received minimal formal education, estimated at less than 1 year total, but he was a voracious reader who educated himself through borrowed books. His early experiences with hard labor, including working as a rail splitter and flatboat operator, shaped his understanding of working people and gave him a lifelong appreciation for honest labor. Lincoln's entry into politics began in 1834 when he was elected to the Illinois state legislature as a member of the Whig Party. During this time, he taught himself law by reading legal texts and was admitted to the bar in 1836. He built a successful legal practice in Springfield, Illinois, earning a reputation as an honest and skilled attorney. His nickname, Honest Abe, originated from his integrity in both legal practice and business dealings. Rise to national prominence. Lincoln's national political career faced early setbacks. He served one term in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1847 to 1849, where he opposed the Mexican-American War, a stance that proved unpopular. After his term ended, he returned to his law practice, seemingly finished with politics. However, the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, which allowed new territories to decide whether to permit slavery, reignited his political passion. The Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858 brought him national attention. Running for U.S. Senate against Stephen Douglas, Lincoln argued passionately against the expansion of slavery, though he carefully distinguished this position from immediate abolition in states where it already existed. Although he lost the Senate race, these debates established him as a leading voice in the new Republican Party and an articulate opponent of slavery's expansion. The 1860 election and secession crisis. Lincoln's nomination as the Republican presidential candidate in 1860 surprised many, as he was considered more moderate than other contenders. His campaign promised to prevent slavery's expansion into new territories while reassuring the South that he would not interfere with slavery where it already existed. However, Southern states viewed his election as an existential threat to their way of life. Lincoln won the presidency with only 40% of the popular vote in a four-way race, carrying every northern state but not appearing on the ballot in most southern states. His victory triggered an immediate crisis. Between his election in November 1860 and his inauguration in March 1861, 7 southern states seceded from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America. 4 more would join after the war began. Civil War leadership. The Civil War began on April 12, 1861, when Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. Lincoln faced an unprecedented challenge: how to preserve the Union while navigating complex military, political, and moral questions about slavery. His leadership during this crisis demonstrated remarkable political skill, moral clarity, and personal resilience. Lincoln took decisive action to mobilize the North for war, sometimes stretching constitutional boundaries. He suspended habeas corpus in certain areas, expanded the Army without congressional approval, and imposed the first income tax to finance the war effort. Critics accused him of tyranny, but Lincoln argued these measures were necessary to save the Union itself. Finding competent military leadership proved frustrating. Lincoln cycled through several commanders of the Army of the Potomac before finally finding success with Ulysses S. Grant, whom he appointed as commanding general in 1864. Lincoln involved himself deeply in military strategy, often visiting troops and corresponding extensively with his generals. His ability to learn military tactics and strategy, despite no formal military education, impressed many observers. The path to emancipation. Lincoln's evolution on slavery during the war reflects both his moral convictions and his political pragmatism. Initially, he framed the war purely as a fight to preserve the Union, fearing that an explicit anti-slavery stance would push border slave states like Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri into the Confederacy. However, he privately believed slavery was morally wrong and worked toward its eventual elimination. The Emancipation Proclamation, issued on January 1, 1863, marked a turning point. This executive order declared that all enslaved people in Confederate-held territory were free. While it didn't immediately free anyone, since the Union didn't control those areas, it fundamentally transformed the war's purpose. The conflict became not just about preserving the Union, but about ending slavery. This shift had profound consequences. It prevented European powers from recognizing the Confederacy, allowed African Americans to join the Union military, and made reconciliation without ending slavery impossible. Approximately 200,000 black soldiers and sailors served in Union forces after the Emancipation Proclamation, making crucial contributions to Northern victory. Lincoln met with black leaders, including Frederick Douglass, and came to support, by war's end, limited black male suffrage, a radical position for the time. Gettysburg and defining American democracy. Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, delivered in November 1863 at the dedication of a cemetery for Union soldiers killed in that pivotal battle, remains one of history's greatest speeches. In just 272 words, Lincoln redefined the war as a test of whether democratic government could survive, and he connected the struggle to the founding principle that all men are created equal. The speech transformed the Constitution's promise of liberty into a moral imperative that required ending slavery. Securing permanent freedom. Recognizing that the Emancipation Proclamation was a wartime measure that might not survive legal challenges, Lincoln pushed for a constitutional amendment to permanently abolish slavery. The 13th Amendment passed the Senate in 1864, but initially failed in the House. After his re-election in November 1864, a victory that wasn't guaranteed given war weariness in the North, Lincoln made the amendment's passage his priority. Through political maneuvering and persuasion, the amendment passed the House in January 1865. Lincoln called it a great moral victory and signed the resolution. Though presidential signatures aren't technically required for constitutional amendments, Assassination and Legacy, Lincoln's second inaugural address in March 1865, delivered as Union victory neared, called for reconciliation with malice toward none, with charity for all. He envisioned a generous peace that would reintegrate Southern states quickly. Tragically, he never had the chance to implement this vision. On April 14, 1865, just days after Confederate General Robert E. Lee's surrender, actor John Wilkes Booth assassinated Lincoln at Ford's Theater in Washington. Lincoln died the next morning, making him the first American president to be assassinated. Lincoln's death elevated him to martyrdom and denied the nation his leadership during Reconstruction. His legacy, however, endures. He preserved the United States during its greatest crisis, ended the institution of slavery that had contradicted American ideals since the founding, and expanded the meaning of American democracy and equality. His leadership demonstrated that moral principle and political pragmatism need not be opposing forces, but can work together to achieve transformative change. Today, Lincoln is consistently ranked as America's greatest president, remembered not just for what he accomplished, but for the humanity, humility, and wisdom he brought to the nation's most difficult challenges.